We're going to talk about lightweight, low-cost fighters. Welcome to the 311 Griffin YouTube channel. I'm Max, and I'm not in the Air Force, and I'm not a real pilot, so take everything that I'm about to say with a grain of salt. I'm a student of flight and military aircraft, and I have been for more than 30 years. I have taken professional flight classes in addition to my personal interest, but I want to be clear. I'm not an expert. I'm not claiming to be an expert. These are the thoughts of an interested hobbyist and a concerned taxpayer only. Before I begin, I want to provide a couple of references to some very, very good information on this subject. There are certainly counterpoints that can be made and that I have read and seen. This is a long-lasting argument, but these articles, and especially there's a PowerPoint presentation, these all have vast amounts of information on this topic that are extremely interesting, and if you can take the time to study it, I think it'll be well worth your while, no matter which side of this debate that you come down on. In all honesty, the heavy lifting of my philosophy on this subject has been done by these articles. So I want to point you to those. I was going to spend a lot of time trying to defend my position, but these articles do it better than I can, and it would literally take an hour and a half for me to explain everything about why I don't think stealth is worth the cost, why I don't think BVR is what they pretend it is, why the missiles and the radar I don't believe are necessarily always worth it. They certainly have their place, but I don't think that those are the only sensors that we should be focusing on, and things like that. The more interesting things go beyond the actual cost of the aircraft. They actually go beyond the data that we can, um, as hobbyists and interested third parties, can even collect, because the data is really dirty and we don't have access to a lot of the data that you would really need to have to evaluate these aircraft. So a few things that I'm not going to defend my position. I'm just going to, not like that anyway. I'm going to show the data that I have access to, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit. Those other presentations are actually where you're going to get the meat and potatoes of the data that actually means something. So let's talk about the data for a minute. First of all, I don't believe there's any sensitive data that I have collected. This is all data that you can get just run-of-the-mill Google, Wikipedia type stuff. The data is very, very dirty, and I'm showing it here. I have tons and tons of data. I've been doing this for years, collecting data, updating it, trying to get the most valid data that I can, and trying to analyze it. It's what I kind of do as in a different industry. Um, I've done a lot of work with data, and so just as hobbies, I tend to pull data on things because I'm a nerd. Um, but I have loads and loads of data, and I want to give some examples of why it's dirty. Um, for instance, maximum speed doesn't necessarily matter, and I'll talk more about that later. I have a usable weight here, which is maximum takeoff weight minus empty weight. So this is basically how much weight you can add to the aircraft in terms of fuel and weapons. Um, Gross weight is a value that I'm always interested in, but it depends. Gross weight, what does that mean? What exactly is it? We've got combat radius. There's ferry range and range as well. These all mean different things to the different aircraft. Is that with tanks, without tanks? um, what specifically what load is this under, and it depends on what the aircraft was designed for, but this means something different for every aircraft. Service ceiling, that one's not too bad. Rate of climb, this is maximum rate of climb. It's probably almost empty. It doesn't really mean anything in a combat scenario. Wing area, that's pretty straightforward. That's geometry. Wing loading, that's gross weight, whatever that means, and geometry. Mil thrust, max thrust, we can actually calculate. That's not bad. Thrust to weight ratio, again, that's based on a gross weight, which means what? But we can calculate this. It's not too bad. Cost. This is a really, really crazy one to try to track down, and I promise you, these values aren't all exact. Cost is crazy. How much does an aircraft cost? It depends. Okay, are we talking about all of the R&D costs that go into building that plane? Because you should, and then you should divide it by the number of planes that were built. However, what if you don't know how many planes are going to be built? What if the R&D that you did on one plane was used to build 3 different planes? Do you have to roll it into the other planes as well? What if you build one first and then you build the other? You can see that this is already getting very, very dirty. If we're talking about the sales cost of the airplane, which is really what I tried to wind up getting, but it's really difficult, because what if you don't, what if you only sell them to America? And what if the real numbers aren't published? Or what if the real numbers are manipulated to make the aircraft look a little bit better to the American taxpayer, which may or may not have happened? Um, what if? But if you sell 50 of this aircraft to this country and you sell 100 to this country, or even if you sell the same amount to different countries, they may be different, and they may have you may have experts going to train people how to use the aircraft. In this case, you may not. In this case, you may have a different avionics package here or there. The quantity of aircraft that you buy determines or helps influence the final cost. There are a lot of variables that go into it. So this cost is really, really crazy. Not only that, but most of the sources I found, even the really good ones, have no idea how to reference cost. If you're going to put a price tag on something for data or for comparison, you have to tell the currency units that it is in terms of what dollar or pound or ruble or whatever it is, and you have to say the year that it is in, because if you've got $1995, those don't mean the same thing as 2019 dollars. Okay, so these are the costs, and I did the best I could to find the best values I could. These are off, but then I converted them to US dollars, and I converted them to 2018 money through inflation calculation, which is pretty easy to do, so that we can try to at least compare somewhat apples to apples. Okay, I'll talk about this in a little bit. So there's a lot of hidden cells here that I've hidden because I'm not interested in them. I've also done some stuff like just to make my chart work be a little bit easier to see. I've got speed times 10. I've got combat radius times 10. Where's the other one? Wing loading. Thrust to weight ratio times 100. This is just to get the data so that I can see it in different forms, or so that I can see it a little bit better. Another thing to talk about is we've got first flight to introduction. We have service life in years, and we have production numbers. These are all indicators of longevity, or how valuable this aircraft is to whatever countries are using it. The more of them you get, that usually means that they are cheaper and that they are preferred. Usually cheaper. Well, maybe both. And then service life is obviously how good it was, how well it served the role. This is obviously misleading because we don't really know. I couldn't find good numbers on production numbers of the F-35 because it's technically not even, it's in service, but if you could call it that. I don't know that it's actually ready for service, but we can't get these numbers very easily, and obviously these numbers are skewed if these are all still in service. Really, the only one that isn't in service anywhere is the F-14, and I believe it's actually still in service in Iran, but anyway, it was technically retired. The rest of them are still in service somewhere that we can look at and get data from. But one thing you'll notice, and I didn't put this in my performance calculations because it would still be skewed, but of interest, the more complex these aircraft get, the longer that they are being tested before they're introduced, from first flight to introduction. This doesn't even get into the development before the first flight. And if we look at the F-35, it's a long time. Like we're talking a lot of time has gone by, to the point that a lot of the stuff that was originally built for this thing is already obsolete as far as coding and computing goes. Where's the F-22? It's actually not too bad, but the Rafale, whatever that is decently long. But anyway, years of service, I couldn't use that for too much because it's a little bit skewed, and production numbers obviously skewed. These are all performance values. They're not really the ones that I wanted, but they're the ones that are easily attainable. Okay, so what I did over here is I did a service index, and basically the way this works is if you're above the average, then you're above 1. If you're below the average, you're below 1, and I'm basically averaging averages to get this. So you get a service index based on, how long you've been in service and how many if you've had more than the average produced, or if you've been in service longer than the average, then you get a number higher than 1. And then performance index is the same way, but with all of these orange numbers. Now, I didn't use radius times 10 and speed times 10 and thrust to weight by 100 for this calculation. I just used the normal ones. I only used those multipliers down here to get the graph to look right. So again, and then obviously your wing loading you want lower, so I divided it the other way, average over the wing loading, so that if you're below average, you get a higher number. If you're above average, you get a lower number. So you got a performance index, and then I basically added those two indexes together. What you can see is here we've got a really good, and I didn't look at the service index too close because, again, it's way skewed. So looking at performance only, we've got a really good one here on the F-15. That's greater than 1. The Su-27 flanker is greater than 1. F-15E is greater than 1. Rafale is greater than 1. F-22 is greater than 1. And the Su-35 is greater than 1. Where's the F-16? Okay, F-16 is not greater than 1. It's pretty high. We've got a lot that are fairly high. If we look at F-35, those are really good. Yeah, F-22, that's what I was looking for. I forgot that I said it. So we don't have anything that's too shabby here except for the F5. And then let's skip this one because I don't exactly know what I did there. Let's just look at the performance index per cost, or per dollar, basically. The F5 gets better because it's really cheap. The MiG-29 is on there. Or, sorry, that's the F-16. The MiG-29. Those are the three best. And then F-18 is decent. And the worst is the F-22. And the F-35B and C are also bad. That's nothing surprising because look at the price tag on that F-22. And again, this really varies, but we know it's really high. F-35, these are expensive. I think that F-35A is actually pretty low. I think it's actually way higher than that because of all the delays and stuff. So you can see where I'm going here. Now, again, this isn't exactly fair. Now, what do we need if we were going to really study this the way we would like to? If we really wanted to evaluate the performance, we would need to know corner speed, minimum radius turn, actual production cost, inflation and exchange adjusted, radar cross section from different aspects, which is, we're not going to get that because even when you can find it, it's front aspect almost always. We do have thrust to weight and wing loading, which are two important things. They're not everything in terms of performance, but they're pretty important. Maximum sustainable G, sustainable being the key ingredient there. Maintenance per flight hour, cost of operation per flight hour, and things like sortie rate, that would be a good one. And the reason those are important is because that gives us the real clear picture of the total performance of the aircraft. We can't really evaluate if stealth is worth it or not unless we have that. Now, for the reasons that those articles state, I don't think stealth is necessarily worth it. And I personally think that we need to have a small, lightweight fighter. It could be 2-engine. A lot of people that are pushing for this would want 1-engine, but I think 2 makes sense too, as long as it's easily maintainable. I think that we can use. I don't think you need a radar. I think that we need to try to seek out passive detection methods. They exist. Maybe somebody. I know that people are working on those kinds of technologies. That would be great. So if you can have passive, like infrared search and track and optical tracking and things like that, acoustical tracking maybe. Is it acoustical? I don't know if that's the word. Have some things like that. Data link, a very robust and widespread data link. One thing that's interesting that I heard one time in a podcast is that the F-22 originally could only talk to other F-22s. They were so worried about the data link being intercepted and decrypted, that that they wouldn't let it talk to anything. So you can't get information from F-15s, F-16s, and AWACS and things like that out there. You could only get information from other F-22s, which to me seems ludicrous. I mean, I don't know the whole story, but it seems ludicrous. I believe that they've tried to rectify that recently, but you've got to have those things: data link and passive tracking and locating. And if you do that, you don't need this massive giant radar in the front of the nose, which is that's one of the things that has made aircraft grow over time, is because we're trying to get these aircraft to do everything and have all the slick bells and whistles. And the nose of this aircraft gets big. It generates a lot of heat. It creates a bigger radar cross section, requires bigger engines to push it, and things like that. It's not that the radar are useless. They definitely have their point. We need some radar in the air, but maybe for a lightweight, low-cost fighter, we don't need a radar in it. That would lower costs and allow us to use these other sensors as well that are smaller, maybe expensive as well, but smaller. Stealth, there are things we can do to make radar cross-section smaller. One of them is get rid of the radar and make the aircraft smaller. We can also use intelligent planform design and things like that to try to reduce the radar cross-section and make it a little bit less visible. And then you just make it perform well. You give it a big enough wing that it can perform, and you give it a robust, high efficiency engine that can push it along at a good clip, and you make sure that it can perform agilely in a knife fight, and then you can field a ton of these aircraft. But the point is that the sortie rates on F-22s are too low, and the sortie rates on F-35s are going to be too low. Maintenance costs are going to be too high. We can't get pilots trained in real-time flight environments. They're having to spend too much time in simulators. We're having, as far as what I've read, and the trend that I think that I see is that we're having a harder time keeping pilots in the Air Force, Marines, and Navy because they don't really like the direction it's going. It seems like they're not happy with the training they're getting. We're doing things opposite and counterproductive to what made American pilots among the best in the world, right? And no country needs to do that. So there's some real problems with the technological direction that we're going. It's not that the technology's bad. It's not that it's useless. It's that it's not necessarily the most bang for your buck. Now, you might say, don't you want our pilots to have the best? And yes, I do. I absolutely do. I think a lot of pilots would probably argue that having more aircraft in the sky that can do the job and having more flight hours and having higher sortie rates would probably be the safest way to go. Now, it's open for debate. It really is. That's why this is a debate, not an argument, and I'm not absolutely adamant that I'm right. Like I said, I'm a hobbyist. But I think that there's a reason why these high-cost stealth programs are taking forever to get done. They're not fulfilling the promises that were made. They're being canceled left and right. And, smaller or less prosperous first world countries are buying up things like the JAS-39, the Saab Gripen, which I think is a great candidate. It's a little more expensive than what I would like to see, but it's actually not too bad on price. The F-16, we could keep building F-16s and F-15s. The Rafale is a little bit more expensive as well, but that's another option. There are other options out there. There are plenty of options that are much, much cheaper and proven technology and are actually very, very capable aircraft. Another thing that we could do is upgrade existing aircraft, which they're behind anyway on their, a lot of these aircraft are aging because we've been throwing all of our money, or a lot of our money, into the F-35 program. If we weren't throwing all that money into there, we'd have a huge pile of cash as Americans that could be put into making certain F-15s, F-16s, and F-18s, getting them their service lives extended so that they're safe to fly, upgrading avionics, upgrading sensors, etc., etc. Stealth is cool. Low probability intercept radar is cool. I like the idea. I think the F-35 and the F-22 should be basically technology test beds. I don't think that we should be producing them in high production, or even attempting to produce them in high production numbers, because we can't afford it. Nobody can afford it. I believe that we should be throwing most of our efforts into practical aircraft to serve the purpose they need to serve, and making sure that we're training our pilots, because that's what has always made the best air forces in the world great, is the pilots. It's not necessarily the tools, although the tools do matter. So with that, thanks for watching. Try to keep it respectful. We can argue, we can debate. Let's try to keep it respectful, and that's it. Thanks for watching. Take care.